Hello, beautiful people, and now let's talk about the brachial artery. I'm Salma. I hope I'm anyway helpful. So, for the brachial artery begins at the lower border of teres major. We previously mentioned that in the axillary artery, and it's the continuation of the axillary artery. Okay. Throughout its course, it's medial to your arm, and then just at the end, it goes to the cubital fossa to give me two branches: the ulnar and the radial arteries. Great. So the course and the beginning and end of the brachial artery are so easy. So it begins at the lower border of teres major, and throughout its course it's medial to your arm, then goes into the cubital fossa to give me two branches, the radial and the ulnar. Now we're going to talk branches. For the branches of the brachial artery, the ones that may make some problems, there's one big artery we're talking about here. It's called the profunda brachii. Profunda means deep, so that's the deep artery of the arm, and you can find that in some atlases. So the profunda brachii artery begins from the posteromedial aspect of the brachial artery. Okay, and it runs backwards into the spiral groove accompanied by the radial nerve, and it exits between the lateral medial heads of the triceps. And throughout its course, it gives me four branches. It gave me one muscular branch, the triceps, the one that it basically passed through both of its heads, and one nutrient to the humerus, the one that basically it passes into its spiral groove. So just memorize it that way. It wouldn't pass through something, it wouldn't supply it. So if it passed between the heads of the triceps, then it would basically give musculature to the triceps. And if it passed into the spiral groove of the humerus, accompanied by the radial nerve, it would genuinely give it a branch as a nutrient artery. Great, by the way, we're talking here about the branches of the profunda brachii, okay? Don't forget that it gives something very, very important, and you will be in trouble if you forgot that. What's that? Oh, it gives an ascending branch that goes upwards to anastomose with the descending branch of the posterior circumflex humeral that we were talking about, and the anastomosis around the surgical neck. So don't forget that ascending branch. Okay, so until now we've got three branches: muscular, nutrient, and an ascending branch that shares the anastomosis around the surgical neck. It gives two descending branches. One is anterior, one is posterior. The anterior descending terminal branch, we basically call it the radial collateral. Collateral means the best friend of, or to be scientifically speaking, it's something that is accompanying it throughout its course. So that radial collateral, the best friend of the radial nerve. So the best friend of the radial nerve is the radial collateral. Basically, that radial collateral is anterior in front of the lateral epicondyle, and here is it, where anastomosis here with a radial recurrent. That's the radial artery, by the way. So again, we've got the radial collateral, and that's common sense. We're anastomosis with a radial recurrent, okay? Recurrent means that basically any artery goes that way, and the recurrent here you see it goes that way, okay? So again, radial collateral with a radial recurrent. What's the other long name that we don't like of the radial collateral? Oh, it's the anterior descending terminal branch of the profunda brachii artery. Oh, just for short, say the radial collateral. And then there's another one on the posterior aspect of the lateral epicondyle. Who's that? Oh, that's the middle collateral. Of course, it has another long name. What's that long name? Oh, it's the posterior descending terminal branch of the profunda brachii artery. Oh, just say middle collateral. That middle collateral also goes down to anastomose with another recurrent. Who's that recurrent? Oh, it's the posterior interosseous recurrent. These are the branches of the profunda brachii. Again, let's say them quickly. Okay, the first one, where the profunda brachii, it's the deep branch of the arm, and it goes from the posteromedial aspect of the brachial artery. It's accompanied by the radial nerve. It goes into the spiral groove, and it passes between the lateral and the medial heads of the triceps. Since it passed between the lateral and the medial heads of the triceps, it would genuinely give it a branch. So that's one muscular branch to the triceps, and then it passed into the spiral groove. Who's that spiral groove? It's a groove into the humerus, so it would give a nutrient branch to the humerus. Don't forget that. And it gives something very, very important, since it's shared around the anastomosis around the surgical neck of the humerus, so it would genuinely give the ascending branch of the profunda brachii artery that anastomoses with the posterior circumflex humeral artery for the surgical neck. Don't forget that one. And then there are two descending branches. If we gave an ascending, we would genuinely give a descending. Descending, it's either anterior or posterior, but they are very bad long names. So we would just say it's either radial collateral, and that's in front of the lateral epicondyle, that anastomoses with the radial recurrent. And then the middle collateral, the one that is called the posterior descending terminal branch of the profunda brachial artery, that's a long name, just say middle collateral. It basically anastomoses with the posterior inner osseous recurrent. Oh, great. And then to continue the branches of the brachial artery, do not get mixed up. I was talking about the branches of the profunda brachial artery, which is the first branch of the brachial artery. Now let's continue the branches of the brachial artery. The second one, it gives a nutrient branch to the humerus. It's called, the brachial artery is the artery of the arm. It would genuinely give the bone of the arm. So that's the humerus, dude. So it gives a nutrient branch to enter the nutrient foramen of the humerus. And then it gives muscular branches. Who are those muscular branches? Oh, we once knew that there was a muscle called the biceps here. Okay, and under it was the Coracobrachialis here and the brachialis here. Do you remember them? I don't want to really draw them because I don't want to ruin the anastomoses and branches and stuff that I basically drew, and it would really ruin the drawing. But again, there was a biceps. Underneath it, there was a Coracobrachialis and a brachialis. Coracobrachialis was the one above, even they had they shared a common origin. And the brachialis is the one that is down. Remember those? Yeah, it gives them some muscular branches. And then we're going to talk about the collaterals. Who are the collaterals? There are some arteries that you may get mixed up of. So I need you to strengthen your biceps now and be sure they're going to be easy. Who are the collaterals? The first one is the superior ulnar collateral, that one. Okay, the superior ulnar collateral, just remember, superior is with the posterior one. The one with an S with the one with an S. So the posterior is with the superior. So the superior ulnar collateral anastomoses with the posterior ulnar recurrent. And here are they. Well, the posterior ulnar recurrent, here's it, and it dotted. And if I drew something that is dotted, this means that it's behind what I drew. Here, even that's the profunda brachii in a spiral groove. It's dotted here because basically it's behind the humerus, okay? So that's, I basically drew a lot of dots here. That's the posterior ulnar recurrent, okay? And that's the superior ulnar collateral. They both anastomose together around the medial epicondyle. Okay, and if you, by the way, focused in the branches, the anastomosis would be so easy. Okay, and then there's another branch that is called the inferior ulnar collateral, and that's absolute common sense because if there's a superior, now we genuinely would have an inferior. That's the inferior ulnar collateral. Why is it called collateral? Because it accompanies the ulnar nerve. But anyways, the inferior ulnar collateral basically gives me two branches. One is anterior. One is posterior. Great. The anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral goes to anastomose with the anterior ulnar recurrent. So don't forget that that's the anterior ulnar recurrent, the one I drew in black. Anastomoses with the anterior branch. There's a lot of black here. Anastomosing with the anterior branch, the one that I'm pointing to here, or let me just highlight it. Yeah, okay. Anastomosing with the anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral. Okay, and that's the anterior ulnar recurrent. They both anastomose together in front of the medial epicondyle, and the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral. Guess what? It goes backwards. So backwards, posterior has an S. So it would anastomose with the one with an S too. So it would anastomose with the superior ulnar collateral and the posterior ulnar recurrent, and behind the medial epicondyle. I don't want you to get mixed up, so let me repeat that. There is a superior ulnar collateral, that one, okay? It anastomoses behind the medial epicondyle with the posterior ulnar recurrent. They have an S, okay? Behind the medial epicondyle. There's something called the inferior ulnar collateral. It gives me two branches. One is anterior, one is posterior. The anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral anastomoses with the anterior ulnar recurrent. Okay, and then the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral anastomoses. Posterior has an S, so we would genuinely anastomose backwards with the superior ulnar collateral and the posterior ulnar recurrent here. So you would see these dots resembling the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral, and here the superior, and here the posterior ulnar recurrent. Great, so don't get mixed up here. And since we genuinely mentioned the branches, the anastomosis would be so easy because there's no anastomosis, dude. We just mentioned it. What is the anastomosis around that is concerning the brachial artery? Oh, we just mentioned it, except a teeny tiny detail that has no medical importance, but okay. The first anastomosis is the anastomosis around the lateral epicondyle. And if we say anastomosis around something, so basically it surrounds it from in front and behind. So anastomosis around the lateral epicondyle, we're going to talk about two aspects, either in front of it or behind it. And I'm not going to say it, neither show you the drawing, you're just going to say it, because we just mentioned it in the profunda brachii. What happened? Oh, we just mentioned that there was a very long name called the posterior descending terminal branch of the profunda brachii artery. And I told you for short, just say middle collateral, I'm sorry. Who's that? That is the anastomosis around the lateral aspect, where the middle collateral anastomosis with the posterior interosseous recurrent here, okay? Around the lateral epicondyle from the backside. So again, there's the middle collateral anastomosing with the posterior interosseous recurrent behind the lateral epicondyle. Okay, what about in front of the lateral epicondyle? I just also mentioned it where I said the word radial. Okay, here's the word radial. And I mentioned that there's something called the radial collateral and anastomosis with the radial recurrent. Didn't I mention that? Yeah. So basically, in front of the lateral epicondyle, radial collateral with a radial recurrent. Who's the radial collateral? It's a branch from the profunda brachii. And who's the radial recurrent? It's a branch from the radial artery. And then, what about behind the lateral epicondyle? Oh, there's something called the middle collateral, and that's a branch also from the profunda brachii. And anastomosis with the posterior interosseous recurrent, and that's a branch from the radial artery. From the ulnar artery, from the ulnar artery. Okay, because that's the interosseous membrane. Okay, I'm sorry for that mixing up. So the posterior interosseous recurrent, which is a branch from the ulnar, anastomosis with the middle collateral. Okay? Okay. So how do we basically remember that the middle collateral anastomosis with the posterior interosseous recurrent? Oh, I've got two ways. What are those two ways? The first way is that the interosseous membrane is in between those two bones that I did not draw because I couldn't really draw them, but okay. Consider that the radius, and consider that the ulna. Of course, they are deep, and the interosseous membrane is in between. The posterior interosseous recurrent is from here. So basically, it's from the middle. So anastomosis of the middle collateral, or they're both two bad names. The posterior descending terminal branch of the profunda brachii. That's a long name, and the posterior interosseous recurrent is not a good name. Radial recurrent is better. I do not like that name. So the two bad names are together, or the ones that are in the middle are together. So the middle and the posterior interosseous. Interosseous is the interosseous membrane that is in between. Okay. And then, what about the anastomosis around the medial epicondyle? Oh, that's also easy. What in front of it? In front of it's so easy. There was something called the inferior ulnar collateral. Inferior ulnar collateral gave me two branches, either anterior or posterior. Let me talk about the anterior. Anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral anastomose with the anterior ulnar recurrent, and that's it. The anterior aspect of the medial epicondyle anastomosis is what I just said, where it's the anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral and the anterior ulnar recurrent. Great. The anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral is a branch from the brachial artery. The inferior ulnar collateral is a branch from the brachial. What about the anterior ulnar recurrent? Oh, it's called ulnar recurrent. It would genuinely be from the ulnar artery. Okay. What about the posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle? I also mentioned it, and I mentioned the letter S. Okay? And I like the letter S because it's the letter of my name. But anyways, the posterior aspect of the medial epicondyle has the letter S, so it would be this superior ulnar collateral anastomosing with the posterior ulnar recurrent. Posterior ulnar collateral, superior ulnar collateral is a branch from the brachial. Posterior ulnar recurrent is a branch from the ulnar. And who is that, buddy? I mentioned previously, 3 minutes ago, that there was something called the inferior ulnar collateral. And that inferior ulnar collateral gave me two branches. It's either the anterior or posterior. Anterior went on the ventral side and made me the front of the medial epicondyle anastomosis. What about the dorsal side? There was the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral, and that has also an S in the word posterior, so it's with them. So again, superior ulnar collateral, posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral, and the posterior ulnar recurrent, and they all anastomose behind the medial epicondyle. Perfect. What about the ventral side? Oh, we just mentioned. Ventral side of the medial epicondyle, where it's the anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral and the anterior ulnar recurrent. Behind, the superior ulnar collateral, posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral and the posterior ulnar recurrent. And it all has the letter S. Don't forget that letter. Okay? There's something called the transverse anastomosis. Well, transverse anastomosis occupy two arteries. It's the inferior ulnar collateral, okay, and the middle collateral. Great. Inferior ulnar collateral and the middle collateral. Inferior ulnar collateral and the middle collateral. Great, great. Middle collateral is a branch from the profunda brachii. Don't forget it. I just mentioned it was anastomosing with the posterior inner osseous recurrent. Don't forget that. Okay, and the inferior ulnar collateral is a branch from the brachial. Voila, we're done with the brachial artery, dude. So again, let's have a quick review. The brachial artery. Oh, the brachial artery begins at the lower border of teres major. It goes throughout its course, it's medial to your arm, and then it goes to the cubital fossa. It gives me two branches. Okay? Okay. For the branches, one profunda brachii, that goes to the spiral groove, and this is on the posterior aspect. It's so deep. It comes from the posteromedial aspect of the brachial artery. Okay? Okay, and then when it goes into the spiral groove, it's accompanied by whom? The radial nerve. You're excellent. And then it gives us a bunch of branches after passing through the medial and lateral head of the triceps. Guess who? Yeah, you're smart. The first one, the branch for the one they passed through. One for the triceps, so that's muscular. Two, nutrient to the humerus. It passed in a spiral groove. Three, ascending. Four, middle collateral. 5, radial collateral. And then we've got continue the branches of the brachial artery. We've got a nutrient to the humerus, muscular to the biceps brachialis and Coracobrachialis. And then the two collaterals. It's either superior or inferior. Superior ulnar collateral with a posterior ulnar recurrent. Inferior ulnar collateral, oh, it gives me two branches. Anterior branch that goes with the anterior ulnar recurrent, and a posterior branch that goes with the superior ulnar collateral and the posterior ulnar recurrent. Okay? Okay. What I just said is the anastomosis. So let me talk about the anastomosis about the medial side of the medial epicondyle, okay? So in front of the medial epicondyle, it's the anterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral and the anterior ulnar recurrent. Behind it, it's the superior ulnar collateral and the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral, both anastomosing with the posterior ulnar recurrent. What about the lateral side? Lateral side in front of it. Oh, it's the radial collateral and a radial recurrent. What about behind it? And on the posterior aspect of the lateral epicondyle. Oh, it's the middle collateral with the posterior inner osseous recurrent. Don't forget, inner osseous membrane is in the middle collateral. So the two people that are in the middle anastomose together. There's something called the transverse anastomosis from the inferior ulnar collateral, what I just said, inferior ulnar collateral and the middle collateral. Okay? Okay. Best of luck.